one of my intellectual heroes, the great Jordan Peterson, was brought before Congress to testify regarding the First Amendment. And I'm going to play for you his response to Dan Goldman. But first, here's what Goldman had to say, and then I'm going to say a few words, then we'll get to Jordan. Promise.
Mr. Chairman, you continually say that it used to be that both parties agreed with the First Amendment. It didn't used to be. It is. It remains the case. We all agree with the First Amendment. But the problem is that the First Amendment is not absolute. It does not protect any single thing anyone says. And there are limits, and that's important. And what this committee has been trying to do for the last year and a half is to chill the federal government from monitoring what is going on social media and otherwise out there, so that misinformation and disinformation can run rampant in only Elon Musk's social platform and every other social platform, so that the Republicans, can benefit from it in November's election. That is why this committee exists.
The time of the gentleman.
And we have gotten no evidence to support any of these allegations.
He's right, by the way. The First Amendment is not absolute, but what is carved out by it are a very few minority of exceptions, and you have to clear a very high hurdle in terms of our liberties to fall under a violation of it. And in terms of misinformation, by the way, that he's claiming the Republicans are benefiting from, is that true? For example, who told us that COVID vaccines were both safe and effective, even after it was proven that they neither prevented transmission or you from actually getting it? Who told you that the lab leak theory was a debunked conspiracy? Remember when they came down with the heaviest of hands of censorship and more against people who stated such? Anyone who dared to question the COVID regime, the empire silenced, squashed, fired, censored. So who actually was then benefiting from said disinformation? Huh? I mean, in California, they passed Bill AB 2098, which would have brought doctors before a medical board at great time and expense to them if they dared to speak out and give their personal opinion and knowledge about the medicines involved with COVID that might have ran contrary to the state regime. And they likely would have had their medical license revoked, that which they spent their entire life to earn. And who, by the way, is in charge of California? The last time I remember is pretty much a super majority state of Democrats, including the governor, who went out to eat at the French Laundry unmasked at the same time that he told everybody to stay indoors, locked down, running up a $12,000 wine bill while the rest of us were suffering from the lockdowns and COVID. Meanwhile, the state put sand in the skate parks, arrested paddleboarders that were offshore with nobody around them, put beams over basketball hoops so that nobody could play. And yet we were not allowed to question such actions. We were not allowed to discuss whether or not these were beneficial decisions to society, because otherwise we'd be grandma killers, and that is how they instilled and drilled into us that there would be penalties in addition to being censored on social media. At least maybe if we were triple vaxxed, then they'd allow us to have an opinion, but by then we would have been bought in to the wishes and desires of the state and likely would have defended our decision unconsciously by not saying a word. By the way, shout out to Pfizer shareholders for that stroke of genius. And who told us that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation and insisted that it had all the rear marks of a Russian hoax, while they were peddling their own hoax, being Russiagate, that they concocted for 3 years straight? And now you want the ability to complain it's the Republicans that are benefiting from disinformation. It's confession through projection. Cast the aspersions on your opponent on the actions that you are performing. And this just proves how perilous a position our beloved First Amendment is in. You know, that amendment which allows us to settle our differences peacefully via discourse, and how the Democrats are doing everything they can to undermine it. Dan Goldman, this official Democrat lying congressman, is the face of the Democratic Party regarding their anti-free speech stance, and when adherence and faith to the Constitution, theirs, is questioned, they reflexively point their finger and blame the other side. No, it is the Democrats today that are virulently against free speech, and they deserve your derision and an automatic vote for the other side that will at least attempt to uphold our freedoms and our right to speak freely, because the right wing has taken on the mantle of freedom and specifically speech. Now let's hear Jordan's response.
I don't think people understand the degree to which they are profiled online and to which their virtual representation is now an iconic representation of them, nor do they understand that they have no rights whatsoever to that representation. So for example, let's say we turn our information about our purchasing habits over to the bank when we open a bank account. 30 years ago, that wasn't such a big problem. With AI systems, it's a problem that's so big you can't imagine it. I mean, I'm certain that my staff could find the data online to absolutely predict your voting patterns with 95% accuracy. You have no idea what sort of digital footprint that you're leaving behind you, and there are almost no protections for that. And so now, and you also asked about the First Amendment.
Yes.
Well, we have very weak free speech protections in Canada, and I can tell you that is not going well. And so the combination in my country, the combination of that and the invasive technology that we're producing at a rate that beggars the imagination, produces a threat to the integrity of sovereign citizenship, the likes of which has not yet been experienced. Right? And that's what this committee should be concentrating on. Like, it's very interesting to watch it because it devolves continually into discussion of a particular event, serious though that event was. It's like, no matter how serious that event was, it pales in comparison to the potential severity of the issue that we're attempting to point to with regards to our testimony. These artificially intelligent systems can do things you can't imagine. And not only can they are and they will. And that will be abetted by the collusion between large corporations and government. And it's certainly the case that the people who stand on the left, especially with regards to their, what would you say, skepticism of large corporations, which is often perfectly warranted, should be utterly terrified about this.
Remember the Patriot Act and how people willingly gave up their constitutional rights after September 11th because they wanted to feel safe. Then these laws were used against the very conservatives that were the biggest proponents of passing it originally. And if you think that the Democrats are going to stay in power forever and wield this power of censorship, the destruction and erosion of our First Amendment in exactly the manner that they choose ongoing, well then, God bless and good luck to them. But if the reins of power are handed over to the other side, assuredly, their speech, their ability to communicate will be destroyed with a vengeance. And these protections that were offered to everybody will have eroded, not just for the right wing, but for all of humanity.